it is working. The wheels turn. You can get your lathes turning pretty fast, but not the kind of speed you need for high-speed cutting. Petroleum. Think of petroleum. It has transformed the world in the 20th century. In such a way that we eat petroleum, we drive on petroleum, all factories practically are run on petroleum, our plastics come out, you're sitting on petroleum, you're full of petroleum byproducts in your body. That's the unfortunate part. And now electronics. Electronics is not the first thing to be everywhere. But clearly, the internet and electronics are everywhere now. IT, information technology, in everything. From a chemical plant to an automobile plant to products you use to go to school to my little lecture on microphone and so on. It's everywhere. It's transformed everything we do. That's a base technology. But then there's another kind of very important basic technology that comes under the name Fordism. A lot of people write about Fordism being utterly transformative in the 20th century, kind of creating most of the 20th century. Why? Because Ford produced the so-called assembly line, which was a mechanical process, not a chemical one, not an electronic one, very mechanical. It's all about wheels that turn and belts that run and machines that stamp and so on, to put together this mechanical product, the automobile. And of course, you could argue the automobile. There was a book called The Machine That Changed the World. And I thought it was going to be a book about when it came out. I thought, oh, it's going to be about the machine, the lathe, or something really interesting. And that was about the car. Okay, all right. Well, cars did transform the world, and they're still transforming the world, not to mention bringing you ever greater hurricanes as part of their legacy, but that's another issue. So is electricity. But what Ford did was what I will call a systems revolution. We will talk a little more about this in the industrial part of the course, part 2 of the course, where Ford, first of all, he had a new, simpler, better product, the Model T. Second of all, he had standardized parts. And he figured out by that time you could make really interchangeable parts, which you couldn't do very well before that, because he had better machines, better steel, and so on to do it with. He rationalized the work very carefully. Before he added the assembly line, he and his engineers laid out the work so it could go from one place to the next without any extra movement, so that every worker would just put on a door, put on a handle, put on a tire, turn a nut, and so on. Simplification. And then put it on a moving assembly line, and multiple moving assembly lines coordinated. And by the way, they were driven by electric motors, as were the machines. So for Ford to do what he did, it wasn't just that Ford was brilliant, by the way, and this is a point I'll come back to, because technology is cumulative, it's often combinatory, putting things together. He had to take some ideas around machining, metallurgy, electricity, factory layouts, and put them together. In fact, he says expressly that my assembly line was inspired by meatpacking, where they cut apart pigs. And they'd hang them on a hook at the top of the factory, and they'd lower them down through 4 floors of these giant factories in Cincinnati and Chicago, and cut them apart until there was nothing left but the chops. And everything else had been cut, used, packaged, and so on. It was a disassembly line. And Ford looked at that and said, oh, an assembly line, that might work. So that's a whole system revolution, and one that changed the world. A lot of economic geographers and others still talk about Fordism, post-Fordism. I'm not sure that that's enough. We talk about industrial revolutions, but there are some people who say, look, the whole 20th century is defined by Fordist mass production. That inconveniently forgets petrochemicals and some other things going on, like the birth of electronics, aircraft, which really aren't done by the Fordist way. But it does cover a lot of stuff. Okay, sources of innovation. Okay, invention. Where do inventions come from? Where do new technologies come from? Well, some of them have come over time from small-scale tinkering, what you might call tinkering by individuals, small groups. Thomas Edison being the most famous example, but Luther Burbank, plant breeding, transformed agriculture long before biotech. Putting together new kinds of, like the great harvester that revolutionized wheat harvesting in the Midwest, was put together by a tinkerer in Virginia named Cornick. A lot of early software is definite tinkering. In fact, it still is. Play around, come up with something called, I think I'll make a personal social networking thing. And I'll just put together some stuff back in my dorm room, and I'll call it Facebook. Boom! Off it goes. And he was just tinkering around. There's nothing revolutionary in what he did, except when he put it all together. And it turned out, kind of was revolutionary. But the technological origins, Zuckerberg was not a corporate R&D guy, wasn't a university lab doing exotic experiments, just a guy fiddling. So it still goes on to this day. Radio was invented that way. TV was invented by Philo Farnsworth, tinkering in San Francisco. Radio and tubes by Lee DeForest in Palo Alto, and so on. And so it just goes on and on and on and on. So that never goes away. But then there's also the big corporations, have the big labs, where they're trying to move science into their products. Famously, DuPont nylon and other polyester and other synthetic fibers come out that way. Apple uses Teams to put together its iPad, so it's not exactly tinkering. It's not quite Zuckerberg. Aircraft design is done by aeronautic firms, and so on. Although they do a lot of tinkering. You probably don't know that aircraft, when they're tested, nobody has a perfect theory of how to make an airplane fly smoothly. So they put them in wind tunnels. They figure out how to, and they fiddle the tails, and they fiddle the wings, until they get it just right to get the least turbulence, so you have a nice smooth flight. That's why these aircraft still take so long, these military aircraft, like the F-35, which will never get built, it looks like, because there's so much fiddling goes into what seems like a simple question of engineering. And then, of course, university science labs have been huge and all, but there's high-end science and engineering. But what about innovation? Joseph Schumpeter, great economist of the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century, said that there was a difference. Invention was coming up with a new idea, innovation was putting it to use, turning it into technology as I've defined it. And that's kind of a useful idea to keep that science technology stuff apart, although Schumpeter wasn't very clear about where science came from and how much it depended on industry. Okay, but then you've got to bridge that science-tech gap. How do you do that? Well, you have to do a lot of adaptation. You have to do a lot of tinkering. And every industry that adopts a new technology starts fiddling with it to try and make it better, try and make it easier to produce, cheaper to produce, whatever. And it takes a lot of learning and a lot of adaptation and so on. So there's this phrase that's become very popular about learning by doing, which really means tinkering around, figuring out the capacities of this machinery. And every new fancy machine needs that, including your computer when you first get it. And you fiddle around and tinker until you work out your routines and ignore all the rest of the stuff that it can do, right? Combinations are a very important principle in technology. Many breakthroughs are combinations of existing technologies. I could just run off, railroads was just putting a steam engine on a cart on rails. And there were already horses pulling carts on rails. And there were already steam engines. Somebody said, I can put those together. Boom. Transformed the 19th century world with the railroad. Airplanes. Think of the Wright brother type, those early airplanes. They had bicycle wheels. They had propellers that were based on designs originally from ships, which is itself a new technology at that time. Internal combustion engines, which were very new at that time. And I don't know what, a bunch of wires. I don't know what we put that under. Think of a smartphone. You just had phones, right? And then you had computers over here. And suddenly, Jobs et al. And all those people say, I can have a little screen and it could do stuff. and got little applications. And boom, you have a smartphone. And it's kind of a simple idea. Making it work, and making it work well, and look beautiful, powerful, that's another issue. And so on. And these kind of inventions over time are generally the products of many minds working on similar problems. I mean, photography was co-invented and improved in the 19th century by many different people. But even today, think of the softwares that are constantly being improved, upgraded. Even if you just take the open source things, where somebody comes up with a great new idea and starts filling it to make, I don't know, Java. Well, Java did come out of, well, it came out of Bill Joy, but anyway. And people get better, but I want to emphasize that problem solving is really critical. That practical problem solving in industry is a part of the whole advance of technology. You don't just sit around and think, oh, I think I'll come up with a great idea. Generally, most ideas come from trying to solve a problem. I mean, this is true in science, too. Why are photons doing this funny thing of seeming to be in two places at one time? Or why are they curving, seeming to curve around certain objects? Okay? And you need a theory to explain that. Why does the solar system rotate? Well, that's gravity. Well, that's a puzzle, isn't it? Once you know that it's rotating freely and there's no ether to hold it up and no God to tell it what to do, how does gravity work? So you come up with the general theory of relativity. It's a puzzle. A lot of these are practical puzzles, though. Now, so as technology advances, sometimes you get breakthroughs, sometimes you just get this tinkering and adapting and puzzle solving. And a lot of it's like in science, a very famous book about the structure of scientific revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, that says, look, most science is just doing the little stuff. And only so often does somebody really have that idea that kind of breaks through a lot of puzzles, a lot of problems, and makes you see things differently. And that's pretty much true in technology. So, and whether it's an iPhone and smartphones, you suddenly see things differently. The potential of an iPad, the potential of a personal computer. Nobody saw that at the time. Everybody thought computers would always be big. And a few weird guys, including Jobs and Wozniak and a lot of other ones, said, what are you doing? So why are you doing that? And these guys said, well, we think computers should be a liberating technology for individuals. They had this idea, and they pursued it and came up with a personal computer. Now, sometimes people have all kinds of ideas we never hear about because they were lousy ideas. Okay? But nobody always knows exactly what's going to work. Is a personal computer going to work, or isn't it? The Palm Pilot is a kind of personal computer. There were attempts to do personal computers 20 years before we got the iPhone and the smartphone and the iPad to do little bitty computers. There were several attempts that didn't work because the technology wasn't ripe enough yet, the capacities of the chips weren't ready yet, and so on. So don't think it's just like this just bursts out of the clouds. There's a lot of systematic effort. But sometimes somebody hits on something that really is a breakthrough. And what the heck? And then some of it's totally accidental. That's Charles Goodyear, who spilled some rubber on a hot plate and realized that he'd come up with, what do you call it? Pardon me? Vulcanization, which made the rubber much more harder, more elastic, and you could make modern tires out of that. Well, how did, radial tires? I mean, that was a corporate innovation, but isn't it interesting figuring out that wrapping the nylon cords in tires this way instead of this way would make all the difference in the world? Had to figure that out. And it seemed like much. Okay? It's kind of a little improvement, which leads to a huge breakthrough that transformed tire production. Yeah. There's a lot of that. That puzzles present themselves to be solved at a certain time. So, the reason we think Da Vinci was so amazing is that he was thinking about things like helicopters when nobody really realistically was thinking about them. But the thing about helicopters in the 1940s was not that big a deal, and the helicopter was sort of co-invented and improved in 4 or 5 different places around the time World War II, when suddenly it became possible and also kind of needed. So solutions come from unexpected places. You get acts of genius, but you get build-up. And I'm trying to emphasize that this stuff, after the fact, we say, oh, Ford was a revolution, or the electronics revolution, or something like that. We put names on these leaps, which at the time you didn't even see necessarily as a leap at first. It wasn't clear. Sometimes you see them pretty quickly, but electronics has been brewing for a long time, back to World War II. Well, actually, electronics goes back to the first tubes at the turn of the century and crystal set radios. It took a long time, but keep working on it, and boom, you transform the world eventually. But how do you know when that breakthrough happens? Well, because a lot of it's incremental, and then suddenly something really clicks into place and changes everything. But again, we don't, that's about all I can say about it, because we can point at examples, but we can't predict how that's going to happen. Now, who's technology? Okay, this is getting us towards the economy side of this. Okay, technology is brought into and starts to become economic property through a process called patenting, and also copyrights of designs and ideas. Okay, and patents are property rights with time limits that are supposed to give an incentive to inventors to come up with something new, and then they'll be able to, they own it so they can license it or sell it. And it's a motivator to get people willing to experiment. And to some degree, it works. Okay, so there is a logic to your hard work and your genius being paid off. Though today, most patents are corporate, and they're a way of corporation monopolizing the breakthroughs of its workers. The credit doesn't necessarily go to the worker. And this is true of universities now. In the last 20 years, they've been trying to patent things coming out of their labs, which, by the way, doesn't work very well because most laboratory results are either just pure science, and so they've got to be open, or they could be applied, but they're not actually applicable yet because they haven't gone through that whole process of application and modification. So these university patents, Stanford has a lot of them, but not that many of them pay off. Handful pay off. Because most university laboratory science doesn't produce immediately usable technology. To say that yet again. That, by the way, is a picture of the patent office there. Now, there's often many inventors that have similar claims, and you get these very complex technologies, or maybe simple ideas, but complex technologies that have many parts. A smartphone is a thing of many parts. And which part, what do you have a patent on? And the first patented, one problem with patents is of course, it's very hard to take apart who did it and say who was first. So there's a lot of disputes over this. Complex technologies are hard to take apart and say who did it, and why would you want to patent every little piece of it when it's the whole that matters? And the first is often not the best. There's a lot of muddling along. You get a kind of good idea in personal computers, but a lot of them were laughable and disappeared. In fact, virtually all of them disappeared. And there's a book by Tim Wu called The Master Switch. It looks at a few key technologies like the telephone and how they were kind of a mess until one really strong entrepreneur, business person came in there, had a good technology, maybe from him or from one of his smart workers or something, and finally got the product to be workable. And that's what Jobs and Wozniak did with the Macintosh, basically, but also IBM with its first PCs. And of course, the patents opens up the question whether anyone should profit from this incredibly social process. And indeed, we see the problem with this today, and there's a lot of literature today about the patent thicket. One who's written about this is Joseph Stiglitz. You have so many patents that you're always licensing and borrowing and using, and you don't even know, you're doing some genetic laboratory work to work on a tomato, but half the processes you're using are already patented, and either you know it and you ought to be paying for it, but you don't. I hope nobody will find out, or you don't know it, and then somebody gets sued. And what's going on now in smartphones? This is some graph somebody did of who's suing whom in the mobile phone business, right? Except they wrote who's suing who, which is showing that science is way ahead of grammar. So smartphones are the classic case of a total mess today. And patents can actually be a barrier if you can't do your research and you can't do your R&D and your product development because you don't know who you're going to conflict with. You end up spending millions. You get sued. And there's cases all over now. It's all over the business press. So here's one quote from The Economist I just grabbed recently. The open secret is that everyone infringes somebody else's patents in some way. So does this patent system actually work in very complex technologies? It sounded good back in 1850. By the way, it's another Ben Franklin invention, I think. But times have changed. And patents on small ideas can stand in the way of big ones. This is Joseph Stiglitz that's written about this in his book Free Fall, about the decline of the American economy. Ford violated patents. The early aircraft designers, builders violated patents. If we'd stuck with the Wright brothers, you wouldn't have had bombers in World War I, fighters in World War I. Pharma corporations use patents to block generics in the third world, which can save millions of lives, although their opposition has been largely busted. Copyrights and music, that's a huge fight today. Is that actually just blocking progress in the distribution and the creation of music? And there are really silly ones all the time. And the poor patent office, I think, is 1 million patents behind. Or is it 6 million? Something like that today. Okay, economy and technology. Oh boy, I've got to move fast. Okay, there are four drivers of four ways in which the economy drives technology. One is cost, or the market prices. One is competition. One is capital investment. And one is the growth effect. Okay, cost cutting, searching for efficiency. This is neoclassical economics. Conventional economics will tell you that new technologies are adopted as an adaptation to price changes in the market and the search for cheapening of your production process. But that is only a very small part of what goes on in technological change. Okay, and of course, it's made for a geographic puzzle, which we will talk about more in the next part of this course about running away from high-cost centers. Going for cheapness, getting out of cities, getting out of the developed countries and the third world countries and so on. The problem, of course, that we'll see is that why do cities continue growing? Why do rich countries continue to stay rich? Why isn't all industry located in Haiti or Nicaragua with some of the cheapest labor on earth? What is that about? And is China simply satisfied to industrialize on the cheap, even though it has a lot of cheap labor? Well, here's a case in point. The maquiladores. Mexico wanted to bring in American industry. The U.S. wanted cheap labor in Mexico to compete with Asia and Europe. And so Mexico opened up this free trade zone along the border back in 1965. It really took off in the 1980s and 1990s. And it was great because Mexican workers had lower wages and their skills were going up, their industrial discipline and so on turned out to be very effective workers, and companies like Ford and many electrical TV companies like Zenith and all prospered on this for many years. However, there are limits to cheap labor. Mexico discovered that its wages stagnated for 20 years, in fact, well into the 2000s. Look at Mexican wages on this graph versus other countries. And then China comes along and has even cheaper wages and starts to undercut Mexico. And Mexican maquilador employment dropped by half in the early 2000s as Chinese imports increased. So that didn't work out so well. And even Asian firms, Korean firms and all, like I got a picture here, came in and used the maquiladors in order to best outcompete American companies who thought they were going to have their own sort of local cheap labor. So that didn't work out so well. Although, now it's not working out for the Chinese, and we'll talk more about this another day, because Chinese wages are going up. And so now the Chinese are not the cheapest. For instance, Nike, which used to have 90% of its shoe production in China, has now moved about 75% of it to Vietnam. So there's always somebody cheaper, as it turns out. So are low wages really cheap? So low wages aren't as cheap as raising productivity, because what matters is not just wages, but the productivity plus the wages. So the unit cost of any product is a combination of productivity plus wages. So highly productive but expensive labor can actually be cheaper than not very productive but low wage labor. That's the irony. Low wage labor isn't always cheaper. Cheap places aren't always cheaper. You can be in Inner Mongolia trying to produce wafers, but electricity is not cheap. It's not even available in most places. So that's not a very cheap place. And then you got to transport out of the Gobi Desert. So maybe that's not so cheap either. So cheap, what looks cheap isn't always cheap, and that's important to remember. We'll come back to this another day. But in terms of overall development and industrialization, no country, no city, no developed country ever developed by cheap labor alone. Industrialization means better and better technology, higher and higher productivity. We already discussed that in lecture 2. In fact, cheap inputs can actually make technology stagnate. You keep using cheap labor, you don't innovate. You don't raise productivity. Yeah, got all these cheap labor. Hey, got all these slaves here. Guess which part of the United States was the slowest to industrialize? The South. Guess what happened to them? They lost the Civil War because the North had all the guns, the railroads, and so on. It didn't just have moral on its side. In fact, mostly didn't. But it had an industrial economy that just kicked the fanny of the South eventually, as it was inevitably going to do. A good example is Apple. Apple hired, after the Macintosh in the mid-90s, hired a guy named John Sculley to come in and run it like a good corporation. Sculley came from Pepsi. He immediately fires Steve Jobs. Really good move.